a wonderful opportunity to talk with her yesterday. So if we have Elena as our guest speaker, it is thanks to Sister Erica. So Sister Erica, would you kindly come and introduce Elena? Where is Erica? Everyone received, and probably you read the short biography of Elena that you received in your little file there, in your little papers. But I would imagine that there are people among you who are still wondering why. Why did we invite Elena Lasida to come and speak to us at our General Assembly? And who is Elena anyway? In 2016, in my community, we organized a General Assembly. It's kind of like an informal meeting of the two institutes of the brothers and the sisters in our family home of Magdala in France. And usually, at the assembly, we always have a spiritual retreat, followed by 3 days of meetings. However, that year, our general priors told us that instead of the retreat, they invited somebody to come and speak with us and to talk to us about Laudato Si. And so this person is Elena Lasida. They heard about her à la Coref, that is the General Assembly of the Coref in Lourdes. I can't hide the fact that, sorry Elena, but I'm going to say, but I was quite disappointed. And I wasn't that happy, I got to tell you, because I felt it was a shame that we had to replace our retreat by a speaker who would come and talk to us on the environment. And I didn't want everybody to come and tell me, to recycle, be careful what you do with the water, instead of my retreat. So when I was listening to Elena, I was really surprised by her approach and what she says to us. Nothing about wasting water or nothing else that I thought we would be hearing from her, but a vision that is far greater, far broader, and that touches upon many aspects of our life, in community, our relationships, and even our vocation, and our specific vocation as members of the community of Jerusalem. So, I was quick to ask God's forgiveness, to say, I've had bad thoughts and take them away. And I was so happy that she came to give us this talk. And it really was very helpful for us to continue to work together and to kind of have another perspective of what we were living in community, because our founder had died and we had just closed one of the fraternities and we were in the process of preparing to close the second. So that's Elena for me, an economist, a theologian, someone who is kind of like someone who goes beyond borders, as we say. She is someone who likes to go beyond borders that separate us and that stop us from looking and seeing the reality with a different perspective. Thank you, Elena, for having come across the ocean, that big, big border, to come and talk to us, men and women religious of Canada. You will do it like the watcher in Isaiah, to whom we ask, and what do you say? And so we're asking you now. You are going to ask us, and you're going to challenge us about in our vocation as consecrated women and men, so that by way of our life together in community, with the responses we will give you, we will attempt to bring something new to this world. Thank you, Elena. So, good morning, everyone. And once again, thank you very much, Sister Erica, for that lovely introduction. And in reality, I have wonderful, wonderful memories of my meeting with the monastic communities in Jerusalem, in Magdala. And they're kind of like a bond that was created among us. So every time that we meet in different places with either members of the community of Jerusalem, right away there's kind of like something special that happens. And I'm very happy to know that it is this complicity that explains why I am here with you today. So thank you so much, and thank you all the organizers for the invitation extended me, which, like the monastic community in Jerusalem, might be a little bit surprising for you. But I do hope that you might live the same experience as Erica had. And if your surprise is somewhat negative right now, it might just turn about and be positive. So, before I start, I just want to say one thing. I'm going to entrust one of my. I have to tell you, I have a weakness. So, as I was on the plane, I got cold. And I have a cold now, and I'm trying to get rid of it since I've been here. So, I'm a little bit not as energetic as I usually would be. And this is what made me hesitate. Shall I sit or shall I stand? I asked. So, I'm going to tell you, I really prefer sitting because for me, it gives me a little bit of a feeling with my audience of being in conversation rather than be speaking, standing up and speaking to you, down to you. So I prefer the attitude of dialogue. But today, I must tell you, I prefer to stay standing because, in fact, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to stand up for the whole hour, otherwise I will sit. And my technicians have told me that I'm okay, so I've got a microphone that I can move around with. So I would say why I chose to stay standing. It's because a long time ago, I was with John Vanier. Everybody knows him, the founder of ASH, and we were together, and they gave us the choice to either stand or to sit. And John Vanier said, I prefer always standing because the strength doesn't come from your bum, but from your feet. I hope that our feet will give me all of the strength that I seem to be needing right now because of my cold. Anyway, I'm going to begin by telling you, in continuity from what Erica just said, how come I have come to talk to you about this theme. And I just find the title absolutely wonderful. And that together we chose with the planning committee. Yes. So Sister Erica said, I really like the idea that I would like to situate myself with regards to you as we look about this theme that for me really speaks of who I am. It is the theme of borders. I feel a woman of borders. The idea of borders was something we talked about yesterday. I heard us talk many times of interculturality, I heard us mention. And this question of borders is something that identifies me and is very meaningful. You know that a border is a place that can be a place of separation, of breakage, of rupture, and also a place of meeting or a transition. It's very paradoxical, really. And so that's kind of the paradox that I'm entering into with you today. And that is what makes me who I am and makes my thought process what it is. And so I'm going to talk to you about three borders or three paradoxes based upon which I kind of like look at the world, okay, my lens, and that I would like to share with you today. So my first one that identifies me, and I think you heard it in my accent, I am not a Quebecer, you can tell, nor am I Parisian. In reality, my French is touched by my mother language, which is Spanish. So my first border is a geographical border. I am originally from the south of Latin America. And I have been living in the north in France for many years now. So my first border is one that I call that I have to cross every day, even if I don't change countries, because the North and the South are always kind of like at play within me, and sometimes they cohabitate nice, and sometimes it's like the war. And so it's a border that lives within me and makes me who I am, and that I have to cross every day. My second border, the one that I am talking to you about, is the one of discipline, disciplinary. First and foremost, I am an economist, and I have been trained in this area, and I work from that dimension. But I am particularly interested in the dialogue between the economy and the other disciplines, especially dialogue between economy and theology. That also comes from the South, doesn't it? In my country of origin, in Latin America, we were very marked, formed or deformed, who knows, by the theology of liberation theology. And so this is the theology that kind of like pushed me to really refine the dialogue between economy and theology. So once again, in a very different way of thinking of the world, of seeing the world from the perspective of economy and theology. And that comes together as they kind of like cross borders. My third border, and the last, is one of a professional border. On the one hand, my main work is at the university. I teach economics. I do research in that area, in particular for social and solidarity economy. And that is a work that is somewhat more theoretical. And also, I have a little mission at the Conference of Bishops in France, and that today is focused on the question of the ecology. I worked at the Conference of Bishops for many, many years as Justice and Peace department, and Laudato Si was published. And so I received this mission, and I was asked to really focus, to concentrate my efforts in the area of the ecology and to walk with the Christian communities in France in their learning of Laudato Si. So for me, these places of work are also marked by borders, you know, the border between thought and action, the border between theory and practice. Because as I was saying at the university, I am called to develop more of a theoretical perspective on my work. And in the work that I accomplish with the bishops, it's mainly the type of work that I do where I have to meet with people on the ground, okay? People who are there and who keep sending back to me all of this living reality of the base. So it is this constant to and fro from life, and that is another border that makes me who I am. Therefore, these are the three borders with which I would like to share my perspective on the world and my reaction to the title that we gave to this year's meeting. The nights are laden with life, and watcher, what do you say? I would say the second part of the title, watcher, what do you say? Comes from Isaiah, right? And it is something that questions me, that challenges me deeply, because I believe that my work is first and foremost one of an observer. I am, when I'm at the university and when I'm living these encounters with the various protagonists on the ground, I always feel that what I can do is observe, identify, and therefore it is based on that observation that I do, and a little bit of the reflecting, ruminating that I do afterwards, that I am able to contribute and that I am able to help those who are more action-based. So that is how I feel my call today. I feel it very strongly, and this is the work that I am doing to try and observe and to recognize where there is life that is kind of like germinating, okay, about to come forth. Therefore, kind of like that kind of sets the context, okay, for what I have to say to you, and that I hope you would be able to have a little bit more knowledge of who I am. And so now I'm going to enter into the theme itself. In this first talk, the beginning, the nights are laden with life. And we have heard wonderful testimonials. And I think that really enflesh this expression, right? The nights are laden with life. You know, it comes from a Turk proverb. And the proverb says, the nights are laden with life, and nobody knows the day that it will be born. The nights, and so you see, we are saying laden with life, but in French they are saying pregnant, okay? They are pregnant. The night is pregnant, and we never know when it is going to be born. And so this is an idea that comes from the night. We talked about the situation of the night, poverty, and of great despair almost, darkness. And in the night, there is the idea that there is something that is in the process of germinating. We don't see it, and we don't know what it's going to look like, what form it will take. But we're waiting as the promise of new life. So the nights are laden with life. So that's another way of saying the night is not just a threat or fearful. It can become a promise. So that's what I'm getting from this theme when we say the night is laden with life. And so that is what we were talking about, and especially from our two speakers that we heard earlier who talked about friendship and women and spending of these very difficult situations that we were told about. So the nights are laden with life. Well, you know, for me, this resonates very strongly within me with a text from St. Paul in his letter to the Romans. You know, that little text, in chapter 8, where he talks about all of creation that is kind of like in the full throes of giving birth. So the pain that the woman must go through, but we still don't see the newborn child. And so this is what we are told. There is the pain of giving birth, right? And I think that's a good way for us to talk about the night laden with life. All we can do now is see the black night. But there is something hidden in that night, hidden way deep in the womb of the earth, that is in the process of germinating, of growing, of taking shape, and that's going to come out. So it is this position with regard to the night that encloses this pain of the night. So the pain of giving birth, There is another little sentence from Paul that I just find really interesting. He says, when he talks about hope, if we see what we are hoping, it is no longer hope. What we see, how can we hope for it? If we see it, to see what we hope for is no longer to hope. You know what? I think that is something that really means a lot to me, this definition that we give of hope, because I think that when we are in the middle of the night and we live our hope and we speak of our hope, we often talk about it as thinking how we might go back and rediscover or take back what we've lost. How can we prolong what we had previously that was life-giving for us and that we are seeing in the process of dying, or so we hope what we already know. And Paul says that's not hope. Hope is precisely opening to this new radical reality that we don't know yet. The night that we are living will produce something new that I really do not know yet. And so that is what hope is. And I believe that the invitation is very strong. Because you know what? Every time that we are confronted with situations of death, situations of failure, situations of when we're feeling that we are losing more and more energy and vitality in our institutions, we talk about what can we do to repair this? What can we do to rebuild it? What can we do to come back to where we were before? And I'm thinking that this is not what we're invited to do anymore. Now we're invited to say there is a world that is in the process of dying. This is obvious. And there is a world, a new world, that is in the process. It's already there. And it's just waiting to be able to come out, kind of like to explode. And that's what hope is, to believe that this world that we do not see yet is going to be able to manifest itself. And this world is the bearer of more life for each one of us. I think that that's the invitation to hope that Paul talks to us about. But to talk about this hope of these nights that are laden with life, I would like to refer to a crisis, a specific crisis. I mean, there are many, many crises I could have gone to choose from and that we are experiencing today in the world. But a crisis that for me isn't another crisis among the ones that already exist. A crisis that for me allows us to understand all of the other crises that are happening and that assail us, the economic, political, social. I believe that the crisis, the ecological crisis, the environmental crisis, is a crisis that does not only speak of degradation or the waste of our natural resources, but it is a crisis that questions the meaning of life, the meaning and the finality of our life as individuals and as a collectivity. And that is why I believe that it is a crisis that is giving us an opportunity to develop, to kind of like uncover in a global manner what is happening in the world today in general. Anyway, I want to begin with this ecological crisis in order to talk to you about the nights laden with life. And I'm going to do this in reference with the encyclical from Pope Francis, Laudato Si. Because for me, it's a wonderful text. It's just marvelous. For me, it's something that is so rich that we can never fully understand it, finished researching it. And it's in keeping with the mission that I received from the bishops. And every time that I go back to it and I have to reread it again and I look at it with another perspective or from another question, I always discover something new. So if at the end of my talk, at least it might give you the desire to want to go back to Laudato Si and read it again, oh, I will have been a big success. So I'm going to talk about the ecology and about the environment from what I heard in Laudato Si. So that is how I am going to structure the question of the nights laden with life. So I am going to kind of like take 3 points, okay, to do this with you. I just want you to keep following me here. The first one, I'm going to begin with Laudato Si. And I'm going to very, very quickly give you a brief overview of what the 3 main principles that are the main basic structure of Laudato Si, kind of like the 3 pillars, if you wish, that are at the very heart and the core of this mission that is presented to us by the Holy Father. So that's the first point. The second one is going to be, I'm going to kind of like make a relationship between Laudato Si, the 3 principles that I just told you about, and another text from the Holy Father, from Pope Francis, that was published just a little bit before, and it was his exhortation, The Joy of the Gospel. And in this text, I don't know if you remember it, there are 4 rules that he puts out there. 4 rules. I remember them very well, because when I read it for the first time, I said, I don't understand at all what these 4 rules are all about. Anyway, little by little, I realized that how important these four rules and the structure of Pope Francis, because he just keeps referring back to them all the time in each one of his writings, and how these four rules make it possible for us to have a global vision on life and on future. So I'm going to make the link between the three principles of Laudato Si and the four rules of the joy of the gospel. And finally, and the third point, my last one, and that's where I want to come to at the end, I'm going to try and take these two texts and highlight from them what I call elements to help us imagine in a new way life, the good life. You know, before we look at resolving problems that we are confronted with, whether it be economic problems, ecological problems, political, social problems, religious problems, before asking how we can resolve the problems, the different nights that confront us on a daily basis, I think it is important for us today to question the very foundation of life itself. And I think that this is what Laudato Si is inviting us to, the choice of the gospel and the joy of the gospel. And that's what the Holy Father is inviting us to do, to really get down to the basics and question the basics and ask ourselves, is there another way for us to represent what the good life is about? That is to say, to live well, of what it can be, bare life. That's what I mean. If we can question these foundations based on that reality, then I think that we're going to begin to find new solutions. But these solutions, I've got to tell you, are not going to be just repeating the things that we already did in the past. I believe that we are going to be able to imagine, invent, create new answers, new responses. So there we go. That is the little program I've set out for my time with you. So let me begin with my first point then. The encyclical, Laudato Si, and what the three main principles are, or the three pillars as I call them. Oh, here we go. The three principles, that's how it's presented. I've got to tell you, this is from my own understanding, my own reading of the encyclical. Okay. My first one. I'm going to come back to a little sentence that was said, and it keeps coming back in the encyclical. Everything is related. Everything is related. Keeps coming back constantly in the encyclical, first principle. The second one, I wanted to say, everything is given. That's the second foundation for Laudato Si. Everything is related and everything is given, gratuitous. Everything is gift. And the third one is what I call everything is fragile. Because in the encyclical, we are reminded time and time again that first and foremost, we are faced with situations of extreme fragility, the frailty of our earth and of all of humankind. So that is, everything is related, everything is gift, and everything is fragile. So let me just go quickly over each one of the three principles, because I wanted to tell you what I am able to glean from these three main fundamental criteria. First of all, everything is related. Our Holy Father really insists upon that. And he insists on the relationship between nature, the environment, and humanity. And he'll also talk about the relationship between all of the dimensions of life. So, I think that this might seem rather banal to talk about this today. You know, I mean, we talk about the environment all the time today. And we keep saying, yeah, obviously, there is a relationship between nature and humanity. But I think that Pope Francis, when he says everything is related, he is inviting us to a kind of, like he says, a type of cultural revolution. A cultural revolution. Because it's true that we realize today that nature is in danger, okay? And that we are invited by everyone and everywhere to be more respectful in the way that we use and call upon the natural resources available to us. But that's not what the Holy Father is asking us. He says everything is related. When he says that, he's saying it's not just to be more respectful of nature, but it is to establish interdependence between all of living beings. It is to become aware just how far our life depends on the life of other living beings and just how much their life depends on ours. And so to become aware of this interdependence is structural. And for me, the basics that in this everything is related is something that we have to rediscover and we have to revalidate and is specific to our Christian culture. That is relational anthropology, to rediscover that the human being is first and foremost a being of relationships, and that these relationships are not just a means to an end, but that the relationship and this finality is its first goal, relationship in itself. And that is why the human is human, and it is specifically and before all else the need to enter into relationship. And it is precisely this bi-relational. It is relational anthropology. You know what? There's something there. It is huge, and we have to be able to reinvent that because we're so used to responding, setting objectives, looking for results, results-based actions, and to think of relationships in a way that I say is instrumental. See, the relationship is a means to something else. But our Holy Father says no. We have to turn that upside down and say the first most important thing is the relationship, and to think of all of our actions and to think of all of our choices first and foremost in terms of the relationships that they create. To say, for example, if we're going to have a project or if we want to make a choice as a person, what type of relationship is that producing with others? This is the change and the new paradigm he's asking us to enter into. And so each decision that we take must first and foremost be guided by this question of what is the relationship that I am building with this? What is the relationship with other living beings? What is my pact with nature? And also my relationship with all other beings, all other persons. You see, I'm just talking to you now in terms of the economy. I mean, if we could do that in economics, it would be a pure revolution because, first of all, economics are evaluated in terms of results, even social results, not just financial ones. But we also, first and foremost, will look at what is going to be the profitability, what it is that we were able to produce. And so the idea is to be able now to evaluate before looking at the final result, ask ourselves, what is the relationship that we are producing? Eh? What a huge change, don't you think so? And we think of all of our activities. Every time that we start a project, first of all, you start by defining the goals, the objectives, where we want to get with this. First thing you do. I think we've become almost like the dictatorship of the results-based actions, whether it be social and charitable and solidarity. First and foremost, we always have to look at the results that we're looking for. And I say to myself, the idea has come now. The invitation that he has extended us is to say, got to get rid of that. Let go of that. The result does not belong to us. It does not belong to us. And to say, what are these relationships that I generate as I act like in this manner? So there you go. Everything is related. To rediscover this relational dimension of life and the concept that the Holy Father associates with this principle of everything is related, I think is a concept that is so beautiful, of what I call holistic anthropology. I found it so wonderful to think that he talks of holistic, integral. When he talks of the ecology, talks about co-development, integral, holistic, and that's one of the main thoughts of the church today. But I don't know about you in Canada, but I know in France, when we talk about questions of the environment, right away we get, environment and human, okay? ecological. And he gets out of there. The Pope doesn't go there. And he talks about holistic, integrated, integral. It's to rethink of life today, the ecology, and our dependency on one another. Everything is related. First main principle, first invitation to revalidate the relational dimension of life. Second one, everything is gift. You know what? Everything has been given us. This is another foundational pillar in the encyclical, because the Holy Father says the first thing that we have to do, because nature is so fragile, so frail right now, in a state of suffering and vulnerability, but the first thing that we have to do is realize that this earth, this nature has been given us, and it does not belong to us. It is true that today the appropriation of this nature allowed us to manage it, but we've forgotten that first and foremost, it is a gift that we received. And the first thing that we have to do in this transition, ecological transition, is to rediscover the sense, the meaning of gratuitousness, the rediscovery of this experience of our earth does not belong to us. Anyway, so that is the second fundamental principle of the encyclical, gratuitousness. And you'll notice that we are living in societies where everything can be bought or everything is deserved, even if it's not a question of money, where hey, I'm worth it, it's due, my due. So, see, we deserve this. It's our duty. And now we have to be able to rediscover this basic experience of gratuitousness. So I think there is a little bit of a revolution that has to happen there too, where we can once again make space for gratuitousness. And the concept that follows is, and the one that we use, the Holy Father uses in the encyclical when it comes to gratuitousness, is everything is gift, is this invitation to ecological conversion. And I find that so beautiful. Ecological conversion. You know what? Because in general, we talk about conversion, ecological conversion. You know what conversion touches upon our spiritual life. We talk about conversion for the spiritual life. It's our religious life. But the Holy Father says ecological conversion. So what he's saying is, for me, says the Holy Father, the question of the ecology is a spiritual issue. And many of you were saying earlier, you were talking about this relationship with the earth. The earth. Someone was saying that nature gives you healing and rest and peace. So there's something when we're in contact with the earth, something spiritual that heals the soul. And that is what this ecological conversion is about. And when the Holy Father talks about ecological conversion, he says 3 things are necessary. First one, communion with all living beings. Communion with all living beings. Do you realize what that means? He talks about, in terms of communion, to talk about human relationships, and the Holy Father says, we need communion with all living beings. What does it mean to be in communion with the ants, with the birds? That's what it means, eh? Communion with all living beings. And I'm asking you the question, but that's what I'm saying. That's what he says. The second element for this environmental conversion, ecological conversion, is gratuitousness. That's the second element. And the third one of our ecological conversion is enthusiasm and creativity. Can you see? The nights are laden with life. When it comes to this earth that is so fragile, he invites us to be enthusiastic and to be creative. Be creative, he says. Create. Bring something new into being. Second principle, finished. Everything is related. Everything is gift. And the third principle, everything is fragile. You know what I was saying? The encyclical talks about this fragile nature of our being, and he's going to take this fragility of the earth with fragility of the human person. And it's often a sentence that he'll use from the encyclical where he says, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor is the same thing. There is not on one side human poverty and on the other side problem of the earth. No, it is the same problem. The cry of the earth and the cry of the poor is one and the same thing. And so that's where we come to this common frailty or fragile nature. And what do you do when you come to this? Well, there are two possible positions when it comes to this fragile nature in general. The first reflex is the one of trying to repair, reconstruct, redo when there's vulnerability, fragility, something that is dysfunctional, doesn't work very well, something that is threatened. Well, first thing you do, run into action and try and repair it. That is to go back and try and get what we had before. So the Holy Father says, when it comes to this, the fragile nature with the earth, he tells us very, very clearly, the idea isn't to repair, to rebuild. The idea is to create something new. When it comes to the fragility, we are invited to creativity. You know, in the first pages of the encyclical, the Holy Father refers to this expression that I was telling you about from St. Paul earlier, creation that is giving birth, the pains of giving birth, right? The work of giving birth, and where our earth is suffering today, and we are in the process of giving birth to something new. We have to be like midwives, the midwives, or midmen of this new life that is in the process of wanting to be born. Anyway, so when we talk about everything is fragile, and we are called to create something radical, something new, instead of repairing what is broken. And I think something that gives us a good idea that is absolutely essential to us in the encyclical, precisely to be able to bring about this something new, he says, and he's going to insist on this in the encyclical, dialogue. You know, there's something there. I find something so interesting about the encyclical, and that is, there's 6 chapters, but chapter 5 is the one on where he talks about, he presents us with the situation of the world and the previous chapters and everything, and the question of the ecology. And chapter 5 says, now, what are we going to do? What can we do? It's kind of like an action stance. And so, you know, if you look at chapter 5, all of the subparts of chapter 5 are all situations where you enter into dialogue. Bring dialogue between economy and politics, between science and religious, dialogue between local and international. So in reality for him, when it comes to the situation of this fragility, what we have to do is create conditions for dialogue. There are no ready-made solutions. There are no ready-made solutions. They just don't exist. We have to invent them, and we have to invent them together, because no one has any solution in their pockets. To dialogue for the Holy Father is not to just talk for the sake of talking. To dialogue for him is not just a question of compromises between different interests, but to dialogue for him means to allow ourselves to be displaced by the life of the other. That's what it means, to move. And that's what he says we have to do every time that we are confronted with a situation of fragility. Sit down around a table and start dialoguing. And that is exactly where we allow ourselves kind of like to pass over, to move over, to cross over. And what I would like to highlight, in keeping with this third principle of everything is fragile, in keeping with the idea of dialogue, is the concept or the idea of sobriety. That's what he talks about. You know, he just brings it in and he slips in, like, you know, when we talk about the ecology, we say, well, you know, you have to be simple lifestyle and but he says sobriety for him isn't just a case of less consumerism. It's not just a question of living with less, and it isn't a question of material poverty either. Sobriety, he says, is first and foremost an experience of liberty, of freedom. Why is he inviting us in this way? So that we will not be attached, dependent on things and goods. That is what this sobriety means. It's an invitation to freedom, to be freed. And I think that this is detachment, detached from things, but also to be detached from ideas, because each one of us has our own ideas about what should be done, what shouldn't be done, right? And in order to enter into dialogue, and sobriety means detachment from those ideas, from what I know is best, and to enter and to allow the life of the other person to enter into me so that together we can find solutions. And anyway, there you go. Everything is related, everything is gift, and everything is fragile. All is fragile. So those are the three main principles that are at the heart of the Laudato Si. Okay, so let me just pick up speed here. My second point, the relationship between the three principles and the four rules from the joy of the gospel. I'm going to go quickly now because it's more or less the same ideas that I'm going to bring back. But I find it interesting because these four rules make it possible for us to see how these three principles touch very basic, elementary elements of our life. So we've got four of them. They're almost banal, like they're so simple in themselves. I'm going to take them in order, the order that I want, but they're not set out in any particular order. The first rule is reality is superior to the idea. Reality is superior to the idea. Second rule, all is superior to the parts, okay? The whole is better than the parts, or superior to the parts. Third one, unity is superior to conflict. Unity is superior to conflict. And the fourth rule is time is superior to space. Time superior to space. I'm going to take the first rule as a basic principle or a general principle, and each one of the three other rules, I'll kind of like put them and have them resonate with the three principles of Laudato Si. But the first one, reality is superior to the idea. You know what? I think that there is a wonderful invitation here that is extended us. It's a new way for us to situate ourselves with regards to the night, or the different nights, darkness, obscurity that we are confronted with today. So that means that each one of us, when it comes to reality, we kind of come with it, at it from our own ideas. What we know, what we have experienced, what we think should be done or not done. I mean, every single one of us has our ideas. And the Holy Father says, reality is superior to the one idea. So what we do when we're confronted with a reality that is still unknown to us, what we try to do is have it enter and be part of our ideas, right? The reality, we take it, and we have it kind of like enter and to fit into our own ideas. But the Holy Father says you have to do the opposite, because you must allow yourselves to be borne up by this reality. You have to kind of like deconstruct our ideas and just accept the fact that we don't know, and that this reality might just reveal something new to us. And so that is where we have the reality that is superior to the idea. And the other three rules? The whole is superior to the parts. Well, you know what? The whole superior to the parts. I'm going to put that in relationship with everything is related. There's something quite interesting in this idea. And when we talk about the whole is greater than the part or superior to the part, that the collective kind of like rests on the individuals. We're all good Catholics, and we know that the community, the collectivity, everything is very, very important for us. And we often criticize individualism and put it down. But our Holy Father says, no, 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 that's not what it's about. That's not what means the whole is greater than the part. To say that the whole is greater than the part, it means that the collective is superior to the individual? No. It means that The whole is superior to the sum of the parts, because what we have in the whole and is not in each one of these specific parts is the relationship. What's in the whole and is not, we don't find it in each one of the parts, is what relates them all together, you see? Binds them all together. That's why the whole is greater than the parts. It's not the numbers, and it's not aggregation, and it's not being collectivity. The idea is the importance of relationship. Each one taken separately is not the relationship. It's when they all come together that they form a whole, and then the relationships can enter into play. That is why I say everything is related and is in keeping with the rule, the whole is greater than the part. Once again, we're setting values now on relationships, on creating bonds and links. The third rule, unity is superior to the conflict. You know what? I'm going to relate that one to the second principle, that of everything is gift. Why? Well, when we talk about all being gift, unity is superior to conflict. Well, my God, we know that. It's superior, it's better. If there's a conflictual situation, what we try to do is resolve it and try and bring about some unity. But conflict comes from our differences. When we think differently, and the differences can become sources of conflict. However, when we say that unity is superior to conflict more than, it doesn't mean that you have to suppress our differences, do away with them. No, we don't do away with our differences. What it means is these differences must enter into dialogue with one another, that these differences, in order for us to get beyond the conflict, they have to become a source of dialogue. Dialogue that I was talking to you about earlier, that allows each one of us to kind of like be displaced by the differences of the other, by the life of the other. And so unity is superior to conflict. And what that means is the difference allows us to build up something common. But the common of this unity should not take the form of uniformity. When you do away with differences and unity becomes uniformity, no. The uniformity or the unity that we are invited to is that where our differences are not in opposition with one another, but in dialogue with one another. And it is this universal where we recognize and identify and accept the singular nature of each element. And it is to build upon these differences. So that is when I talk about unity is superior to conflict. And why am I making that relationship between all is gift? You know why? Because in order for us to come to this unity, to make it happen, which is communion rather than gathering, that we come to this unity, we must begin by letting go. Letting go. Detachment, disappropriation of, and realize that what we have received has been given us. We begin with the other that is different, standing before me. So gratuitousness is a condition for us to come to this unity that is not uniformity, this unity that is relationship. So unity superior to conflict, and is in keeping with all is gift. And the third idea, and the last rule, fourth rule, I'm going to relate it to the third principle. You know, this last rule is the best one as far as I'm concerned. Time is superior to space. Well, listen, this is somewhat enigmatic to say that time is superior to space, but I'm thinking that it's a wonderful thing to look at the explanation that our Holy Father gives us to this rule. He says, why is time superior to space? Because in reality, space, we can control it. It doesn't take long for us to master it. But you've got the space of this room. We can fix up the tables and the chairs, distribute them the way we, so we control, we manage. But right away, space, we kind of like take it and take it over. Time's going to be beyond us. The future, do what you want to anticipate the future, to know what's going to happen in 100 years or 50 years from now. We try to make kind of assumptions that we just can't, because all kinds of things happen. And so time, in that sense, is superior to space. And that's when the Holy Father says we must initiate or set in place processes rather than take possession of space. We must initiate processes rather than to take possession of space. What does that mean? It means that when it comes to the unexpected, to the time that we can't control or that we don't know, the idea isn't to try and create security for the future and to take charge of it. We have to initiate things that we don't know what the result is going to be. So you can see that this is huge. It's enormous to say, yes, today we don't know. We really don't know what is going to become of our institutions in 10 years, in 100 years. We have no idea. But that shouldn't stop us, paralyze us. And it is the fact that we don't know, and we don't know what the future is going to hold for us, makes it possible for us to initiate new things. Things that, by accepting that the final result of what we are going to put in place, we don't know. And therefore, we initiate. And when we know, the only thing that you do is take all the things that we know and kind of like put them on top of that with models that we are already familiar with and know. But what he's asking us to do is to initiate newness, things that we can't know what the results will be. I'm saying to you, it's enormous, it's huge. Because, like I was saying, today we're so obsessed. We're results-oriented people, and we have to talk in terms of results that are going to be reached. And once again, we are invited to do the total opposite, to initiate and to set in place processes rather than to take possession of spaces. Well, that is exactly the same thing that I was saying when I talked about fragility. The fragility that is not an invitation to repair, but the invitation to invent newness. Not a threat. Fragility is not a threat, but a promise of radical newness. Anyway, listen, that's the 3 principles and the 4 rules. And I have my 3rd point, and I see my time has gone by. I can go quickly, or we can take it up later. If you give me 5 minutes, I'll do it in 5 minutes. We just gave her the 5 minutes. Okay. Thank you for initiating a process. I don't know what the result is going to be, but I'm initiating it. Okay. This is what I wanted to come to as I stood up to talk to you about Laudato Si and the joy of the gospel. And so the idea was for me to be able to talk to you about these 4 rules, 3 principles, and for me, invite us to think in a new way. This good life, that is a source of life, the idea of living well. And so, you know what? I think that there is something good here. And there are 3 main ideas that are related to that when we talk about this good life that transpires through these 3 principles and 4 rules, and that I am going to associate them with the 3 elements of this good life that, for me, are the 3 elements, like they're very strong, that were put forth or lived in this modernity. You know what I'm talking about? Imagination. We're talking about a society where we would live well. What does that mean? I think that modernity has introduced kind of different representations of what it would mean for a person or for a whole population to be able to live well. And I think that there are 3 elements that are associated that have to do with this good life or living well. And I think that today we are called to look at the 3 elements of this good life that have to be displaced. The first one is autonomy. Okay, to live well, the good life is to be autonomous. Hey, that's a big word today in our society, autonomous, because autonomous is the opposite of dependency. Autonomy is to be independent. Not a single one of us wants to be independent. We all want to be dependent and independent. We will do anything so that everybody can become autonomous and independent. But autonomy is kind of like one of the big words in our society today. First principle of the good life. Second principle, prosperity. Well, we're all children of the after the post-war period, and the rebuilding of the world after the war. And we thought that prosperity was to come out of this situation of war, of the Second World War, so as to rebuild our society. And we've done it, and it's unbelievable what we've done. And so prosperity comes back with associating us to this well-being, material well-being, and to prosperity. So the second, prosperity. And the third main principle that has to do with the good life, security. So autonomy, prosperity, security. So I don't know about Canada, but I'm telling you, in France, we are obsessed with security. Every time there is an electoral campaign, the first thing we talk about, you better know, because I guarantee the greatest security that you'll ever experience in your life. Okay? So we all want risk, zero risk. That's the third one. The third principle of the good life in our contemporary society today. So anyway, I think that these main principles that I'm talking to you, Laudato Si, and the 4 rules of the joy of the gospel, invite us to all be displaced. And now with these displacements, we'll come back upon that later this afternoon if you wish. And the last one is autonomy. You know what? I think that autonomy is not something that we should be thinking about and equating with independence. I'm telling you, everything is related. The relational richness of life invites us to think of autonomy in terms of interdependence. To be autonomous is not to be self-sufficient. To be autonomous doesn't mean that you don't depend on anyone. To be autonomous for Laudato Si is to precisely create relationships of interdependence. It is to be able to be with others as someone who has something to give and always something to receive from someone else. Autonomy perceived as interdependence. Second one, prosperity. Prosperity, like I was telling you, we think about it as access to goods, more and more consumer goods, food, lodging, healthcare, access to goods in order to satisfy our basic needs. Prosperity, shared prosperity, that is the goal of all our societies, so that all of the people can access and satisfy their needs, and to access kind of like in a good way. I have a feeling that Laudato Si and the joy of the gospel invite us to think of prosperity in a very different manner. You know, Laudato Si says, the Holy Father says we have to redefine the whole notion of progress. That really is a big sentence. You know, prosperity, we thought first and foremost, was access to good things, access to more things. But I think there's another underlying idea there. Everything is related, but all is gift. And it is to think of prosperity as communion, prosperity in terms of common belonging, prosperity as not the idea of satisfying our own needs, but the fact that we are able to feel we are part of a whole that bears us, buoys us up, to be part of a whole that recognizes me as creator and part of a common project. That is communion, the recognition, reciprocal, mutual recognition that we are all creators. You know, you can't just call yourself a creator. You are recognized as a creator by others. So it's to be able to feel that in our societies, groups in our society see us, identify us as creators. That's what prosperity is, the one we are invited to anyway. So the prosperity, communion, prosperity as common belonging. And my third and last, security. Well, there you go, security. Security is how we think of the future. And I'm thinking that we are really invited to think future, not only in terms of security, but to think of future as the capacity to kind of like be open and receptive to the unknown, to initiate processes rather than to take possession of the space. That is to say, the future is unknown to us. What we have before us, we don't understand it. When you don't know, then you're afraid. You know, because we're always thinking of the future in greater security. The nights are laden with life, and no one knows the day that life will come to birth. And so, we have to let this newness to come, to be born. And we say there is no possibility, nothing to the radical idea of being born. The idea is to how to think of future as a promise of newness, how to think of the future as something that I do not know yet, but I believe is going to be bearer of new life. So there you go. The three main principles of the good life that I think are something that we have to revisit today through the reading of Laudato Si and the joy of the gospel. Thank you. So